Hi, and welcome back to the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Aronson, and today I'm joined by Grant Demaree. Grant is the founder and CEO of OneBrief, which is mission planning software for the DoD. We're going to chat about building a defense company, fundraising, hiring, and military transitions to entrepreneurship. Before we dive in, would love to invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. Grant, thank you for joining us today.
Many thanks, Brendan. It's good to be here.
Grant, I've given a 30,000-foot overview of your background, but it's always really helpful to hear it in the first person. So can you take a few minutes to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, let's do it. I was West Point 2013. I got out in late 2018 and wanted to fix military staffs. And the idea was, hey, if we could fix at the time sort of a narrow part of the staff, we could fix operational planning, then in the long run, we'd impact essentially every major military decision. And we had lots of adventures since then that I think you'll hear about today. But after lots of effort, we're deployed pretty broadly worldwide and used in actually 3 of the 4 largest O plans worldwide, as well as a lot of pretty serious day-to-day operations around the world.
Yeah, it's super cool, man. The first thing I want to ask you is, what does OneBrief do? Can you explain it to me as if I was like 5 years old and had no idea, I didn't know anything about DoD acronyms?
Yeah. Okay. So military has lots of large staffs. And these are people who do most of the knowledge work. Think combatant commands like Indo-Pacific Command that has responsibility for most of the Pacific, or U.S. European Command that's responsible for everything happening in Ukraine right now. And a lot of commands underneath them that have their own staffs, often of a couple hundred to sometimes over 1,000 people. And one of their biggest workflows is operational planning that spans from really large plans, like what would we do if something happened in Taiwan, all the way down to day-to-day, what should we do about day-to-day activities, say on the Second Thomas Shoal in the Pacific, or in Ukraine in Europe, or the many things happening in the Middle East right now. And these workflows today are a lot slower than they could be. I think they could be almost instantaneous. And they're done mostly in Word and PowerPoint. I think a lot of your listeners may have done them before. And what OneBrief does is it makes them really fast. It automates what can be automated, and it makes collaboration easy across the large staff and then between large staffs.
Yeah. So I got out as a junior captain after like 6 years. I think you did the same. And I never was on a staff, but why? And I mean, everybody says just how difficult and painful it is. I mean, why is it so painful and difficult to be on a military staff? Why is the planning work so miserable, and how do you guys make it better?
I think there's 2 parts of planning that are hard. And I think the hardest part is the collaboration or coordination. So let's say we're facing something in the Pacific. Well, there's a whole bunch of people would have to be involved in a major operation. So you have U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the Combatant Command, and probably the Navy is doing something at Pacific Fleet, and the Air Force at Pacific Air Forces, and the Army and the Marine Corps, and a multitude of task forces or joint task forces, and a whole lot of outside supporting enablers. And even in a medium-sized operation, there might be 12 or more different organizations involved. And each of them has a whole bunch of specializations inside the staff. You might have operations folks, and planners, and logisticians, and intel people, and so on. And the sheer number of people who have to be coordinated and who have some chunk of the required information or chunk of the required decisions and not all of it means that there's a whole bunch of either lag time waiting for coordination to happen, or communication loss where perhaps what I tried to communicate isn't exactly what you heard. And aggregating those together is difficult and slow. I think that's probably the hardest problem to solve. Product production is probably the problem that is more salient to a staffer, meaning like physically creating PowerPoint slides. And I think there's a little bit of like a signaling or arms race dynamic there, where I get to be the better staffer if I make my slides a little prettier. And we're obviously trying to break that dynamic.
Totally. I have a question. So when we first met and started working together, you had raised like a seed round. You were early. This was 2021. We were like a one-person business, right? It was just me. And for me, planning was super easy because I knew everything about the business. There was no cross-functional anything. It was just like, do the things, try and get enough cash in the bank, you can hire and grow, etc. You have now scaled. Can you give us a sense of the size of the company today? Like what does your guys' headcount look like? And I promise I've got a question that's relevant.
Yeah, so we've got about 109 people today, and we got our software deployed in all the major regions where the military works.
Super cool. You guys have grown super, super quickly. I mean, I'm curious, does studying how your end user uses your guys' software to plan cross-functionally, it's complicated, information is somewhat siloed, but it all has to build up into one coherent plan. Does that influence how you think about planning and strategizing for the future of your company itself, right? Are you finding yourself using any of the same principles or any of the same tools that your end users are using when they're thinking about military operations?
Yes and no. So the yes is I care a lot about good collaboration software. Like we use probably the stack that a lot of startups around our scale use. Like Notion is a truly great product.
Yeah.
It's so good. If you don't use it now and you've got a company that's like 10 or more, you should seriously check it out. A lot of what the product folks there do is some stuff that inspires me. There's not really a one-to-one correspondence because the types of data that make sense in the military aren't really the types of data that you use in the commercial world. It's like most of the military's data is geospatial or time-based, and that's not really a thing in a startup of my scale. Plus, some of the things that we did that I thought were more innovative just don't have a good commercial analog. So a good example is most of the military's data is in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, PDF, certain map files. Like I know APIs are kind of the DoD flavor of the month, but I don't necessarily agree that all the data is available to an API right now. So getting really good at importing and like auto parsing lots of sources of data really mattered. And that's just not really a problem that I have because at a business of my scale, I don't have that much data.
Interesting. Okay. Well, they say there's no stupid questions, but honestly, it seems like that may have been one. I want to ask you guys a little bit about fundraising. So you guys have raised capital. How much have you guys raised to date?
53 million so far.
Got it. Okay. $53 million. It feels like every venture capitalist who was investing in crypto 5 years ago today is investing in dual use companies. You guys are not a dual use company. You are single use. You only are used by the DoD and the government. What challenges has that presented in fundraising? The fact that you guys are not dual use, and then maybe after that we'll dive into some of your hot takes about dual use.
So it really mattered early on, like at the pre-seed and the seed, saying I'm not dual use. I don't think dual use is right for us. I think it'll distract us. I think that getting product market fit in two markets simultaneously, if the user's needs are super different, is a bad strategy. And the counter to that has to be, let me demonstrate how giant my TAM is. And in the early days, like pre-defense tech being sexy, that didn't play very well. And in fact, there were a number of investors who who really pressed me on, hey, can you just give us a dual use answer so we can say yes? And of course, my answer to that is like, no, I don't think dual use is a good move. And I actually think dual use is a way for certain smaller funds to escape some pretty harsh realities of defense tech that I'll talk about in a second. At the later stage, nobody cared. At the later stage, like our numbers were pretty solid. I think the vision and I had gotten better at articulating the long-term vision and large TAM to mid-stage investors. And honestly, I started out quite bad at that. And by the Series A and later, hey, you should consider dual use was never a question.
So you mentioned that you've gotten better at communicating that long-term vision. What is the long-term vision? Where do you guys see yourself in 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think the important thing is fixing what a military staff is. So there's a lot of properties of like a future military staff that I want these to have. And I think the most important one is that they're crazy fast. Meaning, I think a military staff should react to outside changing information like Goldman Sachs reacts to the news. Like it's almost instantaneous. You found something out, everything you're doing, all of your subordinate units have just immediately done the appropriate action. I think the second property we're going for is making them superhuman in their like the intelligence, meaning like how smart their plans are, how smart their decisions are, as well as in coming up with some things that a human alone would never come up with. And I'm also trying to make them less reliant on huge amounts of manpower. It's really crazy costly, and it's actually pretty hard for the department to even come up with all these people. It's crazy costly to have every time operations get more complex, you need to ask for more people that, of course, have a huge support train. And if you're trying to put them, forward in theater, it's even worse. And I want to eliminate that reliance. So basically, I want to build the future of a military staff.
How do you think AI is going to impact the future of military staffs and military planning?
Well, whether the AI maximalists are right or wrong, it will transform and be completely unrecognizable in 2 years, regardless. So even with things that have already happened that are basically baked in, meaning assuming no new capability is beyond what like GPT-4 can do, I think you already get way faster. Because I think there's a lot of little parts of staff work that are very ripe for automation today. The easy examples of ripe for automation is things like scheduling and routing, a huge amount of what happens in the logistics world. I was going to say tip fid, but I've realized that I need to define my military terms, and that's basically like the routing or flow of people and equipment into a theater of war. I think those are super ripe for automation. I think the parsing, summarization of all your incoming data is super ripe. We actually do some of that already. Basically, I think there's a lot of kind of mundane utility automations that if you productize them correctly can make you like way faster without assuming better models. But I still don't think that's the correct like way of understanding where AI is going in a military staff, because I think we will have much better models. And really what we're pursuing, what I put the most energy into, is the fully AI generated course of action via good wargaming.
Interesting. Yeah. So you basically would have a general with a much smaller staff, and they are given a series of COAs that are fully fleshed out, and they can interact with the AI, tell it, yeah, we like X, Y, and Z about this one. We would prefer to see something like this. And then it'll spin up a fresh COA and be like, yep, that's the one.
Yep. That is almost exactly how I see it. The human or general only interacts at the very highest abstraction level, and everything that's everything outside the most abstract decision is just machine done.
Do you think that AI is going to be used for things like targeting or weaponeering? Not weaponeering, but like, do you think that AI, obviously it'll be involved in the kill chain. Do you ever think that there'll be a day where AI has like discretionary authority over weapon systems?
Yeah, it's the hardest debate, isn't it? I mean, I know there's a lot of opinions in DoD. I mean, I know there's a lot of opinions internationally on this, and certainly Ukraine and Israel have an opinion there too. It's more of a regulatory question than a technology question. That is like, obviously you could do it. And I'll defer the policy question to the policymaker.
Fair. Very fair. Okay. I want to ask you one more question about just like how you got from starting from scratch to where you are today. I want to ask you a little bit about Y Combinator. You participated in YC. There are a bunch of vets that have gone through the program, but I would imagine fairly few that have gone through for defense-focused businesses. Would be curious, first, if you could just tell listeners who might be less familiar with what Y Combinator is, what is the program? And then second, like, was it valuable? Did you guys get something out of it? Do you recommend it?
Yeah, we did, and I do. So Y Combinator was crazy hard for us to get into because this was before defense tech was a thing. We were like, we're now the defense company that they tell their defense company to come talk to, and now it's totally different, and like you can get in as a defense company. When we did it, we did a very poor job of even persuading people that the problem we were solving was this like giant important problem, which was really difficult for me because like I think that it's, I think solving military decisions is the single most important thing happening in defense tech. And like when you sit aside from a YC partner in our initial interviews, when we were pre-revenue, and they're like, I don't even believe this is a problem. And that's that's a difficult situation. And we actually tried 4 times to get in, and we got in on the 4th try. And we only got in after we had like way more revenue than actually I think anyone in our. We got in very late, which obviously made some, or it meant that some of the programming wasn't exactly right for us, just because by the time we were at that point, it's like, okay, we're through that, we're done. But I actually got a lot out of it anyway, and if I could do it again, I would do YC again. So number one, I think your YC classmates are really good. Like there's a couple who I stayed in touch with pretty closely, and whose businesses have gone on to to do quite well. And I think it's good to see what other seriously motivated founders who are in this for life are trying. The other thing that it really did for us is it changes fundraising dynamics, and it's one of the reasons we were able to get such a good investor at our priced seed. That was Caffeinated Capital. And the thing about really like genuinely helpful, sophisticated investors is that good money follows good money. So getting Caffeinated at the seed let all these other funds follow, and they've been pretty huge value add. And I don't think that would have happened, or at least it certainly wouldn't have happened on the same economics without YC.
Interesting. I want to ask you for some hot takes. We talked, for folks that are listening, we talked in the pre-roll, so before we hit record, about a couple of hot takes. So Grant, I'm hoping that you share a little bit about it. First, you've even already mentioned this, that investing in defense specifically can be problematic. Why is that? Can you help explain that to someone that might be transitioning out of the military and has less of a sense of venture capital, has less of a sense of what is out there in terms of startups?
Yeah. So if you're investing in defense as a giant fund, I think it's pretty good. Like I 100% believe in like A16Z and General Catalyst and some of the newer like large funds entering into defense. Like they're probably going to make good money off of this. And I think it's a good strategy because a lot of really good defense businesses require just huge amounts of capital. But can ultimately be very successful cash flowing businesses. I think Anduril's kind of the canonical example where before Anduril is a self-sustaining business, maybe they will raise it might be like halfway to what they're going to raise. Maybe they're going to raise $8 billion. It wouldn't shock me. And they do that because they've self-funded this huge amount of R&D, and they believe that they're going to have something so valuable that DoD needs it. Now that we have this platform, you just win the war by having it. So the appropriate price is infinity dollars. And whether I totally believe that or not, there is some price per share where I believe the Anduril thesis. And now there's a bunch of Anduril for X, and if you're a giant VC who's willing to put huge amounts of money after it, and if the particular platform is something that in your mental model of the future of war is necessary, then I kind of believe that too. But I guess where I'm going is there is money made in defense. We know it's a growth industry. Now we know that the barriers to new entrants are way down from what they used to be, and money is going to be taken away from the existing primes, and it's going to flow into new entrants. And I also think that the total amount of money for defense tech, coming out of DoD and coming out of other countries is just going to get bigger, because I'm expecting a lot less of the DoD budget to go to personnel, as the recruiting gets a little tighter, and as people are able to be made a little more productive on a per person basis, which of course unlocks even more money. And then the geopolitical situation unlocks even more. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying that I totally buy a large fund defense tech thesis. What I really wanted to say is that I don't buy a small fund defense tech thesis, because if you're trying to invest in these like super capital intensive businesses, then the best companies won't even want to take like a pre-seed from a small fund, especially sort of the emerging manager that doesn't attract good follow-on capital when they need a huge amount. You won't be able to win the best deals. The giant funds are writing these like option checks to new companies where they're at very artificial valuations, not trying to make money off the pre-seed. And basically what that means is that I think the smaller funds in defense tech just will probably get wiped out in the next downturn, or at least will not get the returns they're going for. I have more thoughts on that, but I've already talked for like 3 minutes.
Dude, the more you talk and the less I talk, the better for everybody. I promise.
Thank you.
I would say one of the dynamics that you've highlighted, which is that the best companies want to raise money from tier one VCs. That is actually true. It's not just true in defense; it's just true across the board, right? Like being an emerging manager is super, super hard. I'm curious, like, if you have any thoughts on the pushback there, or if there are other data points that you think are reasons why emerging managers might struggle in investing in defense.
First of all, I don't want to make it sound too doomed. We took money from emerging managers, and like a secondary transaction is going on right now where the emerging manager that invested in us is getting back 34x in like
Dude, let's
2
go.
years and some change. So it could be worse. I guess what I mean is we're obviously delivering some money for emerging managers. I know there are some emerging managers that got in on Anduril early and are doing like great. And I actually know like a pretty good number of companies that like not just return capital, but returned like just insane like fund returning amounts relatively quickly. So it's not totally doomed. But I guess you'd have to have some like very good, especially in defense, you'd have to have some very good reason why you're going to do better than these giant funds. And I guess the only reasons I've been able to think of that you'd beat the giant funds are one, that you have like a better mental model of the future of war or the future of defense. So the big funds think that, like, certain platforms are going to be useful, and you think that like some other thing is going to be really important. Like I'd say Starlink, but that exists already. Right. But the sort of thing that people don't buy, and that isn't sexy in the Valley yet. And in that case, you're non-consensus and right, and you win. And since I think, like the sophistication of Silicon Valley's like mental models, the future of war, like is not very sophisticated yet. You can probably win there if you're just thinking really hard about where you want technology to go. I guess the other place where you could win as an emerging manager is if you're able to like win by identifying founders that send the wrong signals. Like I sent kind of the wrong signals to big VCs early on, like didn't really know how to play the game. It seems a little silly now because like we have not struggled to raise in the late stage, but we like really struggled to raise in the early stage. No, and I think that's how people were able to make money, is said, hey, I see certain potential here. And I think if you're an emerging manager and you can spot some potential that's signaling wrong, then you can probably make a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, a contrarian viewpoint, I think, is really critical for venture investors. And venture is just such a hard business. Like, all business is hard. Your business is super hard. Venture, I think, is like, it's a very, very difficult industry. For folks that are listening that are less familiar with it, check out some of the podcasts that Tim has hosted. We've had a bunch of VCs on in the past who've explained the natures and dynamics of the industry. But it is you can look up the returns profiles for different funds, and it's tough to make money in venture. It's really hard.
I have so much respect for investors, like especially like really good investors. They I mean, 'cause these are like A students, like who worked really hard and were also really smart, which by the way is not exactly me. I mean, I don't know that I need to like share my transcript on this, but I made various sacrifices to get certain experiences, and I don't know that. Actually, I will share something. A current advisor to our company, then Brigadier General Rich Clark, who was the commandant at West Point, is and ended up as 4-star. He like went down to check on my grades in my second semester senior year at West Point. It was like, why does Cadet Demaree have 4 Fs and a D at 10-week grades? I promise I had like a really good reason, and it was like I was doing something that was very meaningful with my time, and like I was kind of counting on finals to make it work, and that was ultimately a good bet, and I don't regret how I spent the time. But like that's kind of not that's not what you need to be a good investor. A lot of, especially at late stage, like are very, very analytical or very hardworking or extremely responsive. And I'm like really impressed with these people.
Yeah, it's hard. I want to ask you for some more hot takes. You've got a hot take around hiring. Would love to hear a little bit about what your thought process is around hiring processes, building teams.
Okay, so I mean, I guess I want to start with the parts that aren't hot takes, that are like pretty consensus, but like I very much agree with. So like starting on the consensus part, as a startup, you really need to not be hiring until post product market fit. And that's like super rough on a lot of people, and that's super rough on military people, because like we kind of like having teams, and like we like interacting with people. We like people. I like people. Like I think there's a lot of social incentives that tell you want to hire, and a lot of social incentives that say, hey, I'm a 1-person company equals I'm kind of low status. And like I think it's very important to be disciplined about that for a really long time. And there's a huge amount that can and should be done as a 1 or 2-person company to save a lot of money and get really, really far. And really far in the case of a product company means post product market fit. If you're a services company, like kind of the advice is totally opposite. Like services need to scale and need people very quickly. So like do the opposite of what I said. But as a product company, like hiring mostly bad. But I guess that brings us to when it is time to hire. And like I've hired a pretty, like not some like crazy large number of people, but like there's 109 of us. Like I've obviously made some hiring mistakes, and I'm like pretty proud of where we ended up. Like we until a month ago, I could say no one had ever we had never had regretted attrition, and that everybody's quite happy here. Unfortunately, someone got offered a political appointment, and you can't deny the political ones, or else they like blacklist you. So we've now had one. Very, very sad. Anyway, so in terms, I'm trying to think of a not so offensive, but like right level of offensive hiring take. I guess my like right level of offensive is about counter signaling. Okay, so signaling, counter signaling. If you're trying to do some signaling, which is like what hiring mostly is, like, or at least what like getting hired mostly is, like you're mostly trying to signal, I'm super conscientious, I work really hard, I'm also super smart, and I also have whatever like hard skill experience or whatever that is required. And for the most part, like people are sending like credible signals of these. So if you're trying to signal I'm super conscientious, then a transcript of all A's is like really helpful. If you're trying to signal like I'm a good person to have around who people like, then like having references that come in a certain way or reputation kind of helps with the signaling. And I mean that I think is pretty consensus. But I think the less consensus part is the counter signaling. Which is basically when if you have so much of a certain trait that you like signal as though you had almost none of it. So like this is kind of like Palmer Luckey walking into the Pentagon in a Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops, which is I'm like so high status that I know I can get away with that. And if someone else did that, like it totally wouldn't work. And like, let's say you're like in high school and the most like muscular, socially adept, well-liked dude walks in a pink shirt that actually like parses pretty well. And people were like, look at this big strong man there. And then suppose you had someone who was, at the 50th percentile in those traits, it probably wouldn't parse that well. And like you would read it as like the exact opposite. Okay, so that's like the foundation on counter signaling. Why do I care in hiring? MBAs are like a honest and credible signal of a certain level of emotional intelligence, a certain level of real intelligence, a certain level of conscientiousness to like get there and get selected and do the thing. And it kind of works. But if you were, I've very much enjoyed hiring people out of the military who refuse this. I think that refusing to do it is a good counter signal if you can play it. Meaning, if you're high enough in the traits desired, then refusing to do the MBA will actually make you more attractive.
Interesting. That is an interesting take. I mean, I think MBAs, they're neither necessary nor sufficient for anything in life. Like, I have found it helpful, but that's because I'm in a business that is like purely network driven, and the MBA is a masterclass in networking, right? Like, obviously in that domain specific way, it's helpful. But I don't think that it's very helpful for the vast majority of starting a business. I didn't learn shit about sales at Wharton, literally nothing. Like, there was not even a sales class. There was not a sales management class. And that's like 90% of what you do in an early stage company, which feels wild to say, given that it's the backbone of all business. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think for veterans that are considering an MBA versus maybe thinking about skipping it, I think if you're planning to skip it, would your advice be, from folks that you've seen take this counter signal, that you have to have the other ducks in a row? Like, you've got to have other things that make you kind of like stand out from a pool of resumes that you might otherwise see. I'd be curious to hear some thoughts about the folks that you have hired who haven't gone that route and what stood out about them.
I mean, if you have someone who skipped it and has some other like credible signal that they're so far beyond needing such a thing. So you get the person who like you call all their former colleagues, and honestly, for a lot of these people, like you didn't have to call, because like they called you. We're like, hey, John Doe is so like John Doe could have like unilaterally won the war if we had just put John Doe in charge. And like you really do get people who reference like that. I think that's the person who benefits from skipping. And it actually doesn't have to be any particular trait. Like, some of these people are, getting there on like a certain understanding of like human beings and like kind of like the like agency type skills. And like some of them are getting there on being, like IQ 1000, and that'll play as well. And some of them on like a little combination of the other two, plus like being hyper conscientious and just like work all the time. And like, I'm happy with all three of those packages. Like, there's a correct place in the business for each of the three. But I guess the point was less like a specific trait, and as much that like there was some extreme value in one of those traits.
Got it. Grant, I want to ask you another question. So you guys have scaled really rapidly. What have been some of the biggest challenges of scaling from when it was just you and, a handful of folks to where you guys are today?
Oh, that's a good question. We've had so many. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges was when I no longer knew all our customers. And that was very difficult, because I was like personally used to like knowing all these people and like trying to like know a lot about like how they think and what they care about and like what made them want to buy and like what they were expecting from us and from our product. And not being able to do that was like a pretty rough transition to delegate. Like as it is now, like we've got this like big company, customer relations team. And like I'm really proud of these folks. But I think that one was uniquely difficult.
What are some of the other big challenges? I mean, obviously like setting a culture, things that people typically talk about, continuing to grow. I'm not sure if you guys ever like ran into an issue with scaling your sales team, any of these kinds of issues that you guys have run into along the way?
The culture one I'm like really proud of. Like we put a decent amount of effort into that, and like most of culture is like who you hire, fire, and promote anyway. So like if you're really like if you're really trying to do a good job with who you're attracting and hiring, and you're willing to let people go relatively early, if it's just maybe we made a hiring mistake, then I think that makes the culture a little bit easier. And since we are all remote, I put a lot of effort into how things are documented and like what to put in writing and like which meetings are appropriate and which ones aren't. And I think having a lot of clear and useful written content that maybe I spent a lot of time writing once, but now I don't need to repeat quite as many times, I think that made it a little bit easier. But also, like, we're only at 109, and like some of these like defense tech businesses are like at 2,000 people right now. So maybe if you ask me in a year, I'll tell you that it was harder than I thought.
Yeah, I have. There was a gunner at my first unit. He was a Silver Star recipient. A gunner is like the weapons expert in the Marine Corps for each battalion. He used to say, people, whenever he heard the word boot, he would say, "We're all a boot to someone." And so you're sitting there at 110 employees, and you're like, "Man, I'm like small relative to some of these other companies." I'm looking at you, and I'm like, 110 employees. That's a lot of people, man. Like that's a significant leadership challenge, especially being remote.
But defense tech in general is like always going to be small. Like from a large enough investor's perspective, like if you're one of the really big investment banks, then nothing in defense tech is big. Like Lockheed Martin is tiny, just because like defense as a percent of the economy is not very large, and actually we should be like really grateful for that.
Yeah. Grant, how did you guys figure out how to sell to the DoD and how to navigate just such a complicated buying process?
I guess there's two ways to answer that, which is one, like a couple of like tactical things that were pretty effective of like where certain money is and what contract vehicles make things easy or hard. But I don't know that that's what really mattered. I think what really mattered was solving something that was really important to the buyer. Okay, so we did do a number of things that mattered to sell. Like we took a government purchase card purchase in like our very first sale and said, let me just get in the door and demonstrate some value. I actually don't care how much money it is. We actually never got paid for that, by the way. It's okay. Got me into the skiff. And we didn't pursue very hard because we were getting what we really needed, and getting the product in front of some users and building some credibility to lead to a real contract, and then like even the first like real contract was very small, and like we certainly lost money on it, but we leveraged that to say, the product is done well here. We got some reputation. Let's get into a number of other units. And eventually we said a good combination of, OTAs that are, relatively fast, our own IDIQ, which is certainly the slowest to get, but has been very helpful to us. And just subbing off some of the large existing IDIQs, which are very fast, impose a fee, but the government pays it for us, and it mostly comes out in the wash. I guess that combination has worked really well.
Got it. Grant, I want to bring things home by asking, what general advice would you have for transitioning vets? It can be folks that are interested in entrepreneurship or just advice more generally that you'd like to share.
Okay, I am like so cautious about giving advice. And I'm cautious about giving advice because I know I have like fairly idiosyncratic preferences. Like the thing that would make me like very, very satisfied and I would care about, perhaps doesn't satisfy the whichever transitioning veteran I'm talking to. And I think the first advice would be to know what that is. Like I think being like pretty honest about like the things that you're trying to achieve would be very helpful. So for instance, if you're trying to make a lot of money, just be really honest about that. There's nothing wrong with that. Like that like drives the whole engine of the US economy. Like, most of the value you create isn't captured by you anyway. And like that's awesome. If you want to do something that other people value, just do that and know that that's the thing. And if you're seeking status, and like care, like perhaps what your peers, your family or whatever think, then like instead of saying, hey, that's a bad motivation, I think it would be better just to be like to be clear that that's the thing. And maybe on reflection, you're like, that's actually not what I want. And I think that's a very useful reflection. And I think there's like maybe some like higher things that maybe the thing you want. Maybe you want to really matter, and really matter meaning like there's some like method of improving the world or improving things for other people or improving like the trajectory of something that you care about. And it would be worth really knowing that, because if you were trying to make like a certain dent in the world and then went into management consulting, then maybe that wasn't the thing. So I guess some honesty about what you want, followed by like some very good awareness of like where you stand on certain traits. Like if you're 20th percentile conscientiousness, then like please don't go into like consulting or finance or any of the things that make you like work a certain way, especially if you're 20th percentile conscientiousness, but like super extroverted, and like the right answer would have been sales. So I think knowing like where you stand on certain traits and what you want, it sounds super trite, is probably going to be very helpful.
I mean, like, it's one of those things that maybe it feels obvious to you. And I mean, sure, plenty of folks have said to be self-aware. I will say, in 100 episodes of recording this podcast, I think you might be the first person that made such a point of saying, be really self-aware and like rack and stack your own priorities and what you're good at. I mean, people say it in different kinds of ways, but that self-awareness is really important. So I appreciate that. It's good advice, Grant.
I've actually got another one. Save a lot of money. Really save a lot of money. Like the only reason I could do this company at all and had a chance to make a bunch of mistakes and be fine is like I was a single deployed captain for like a while, and saved all of that. And that gives you kind of the cushion to make a couple mistakes.
Totally. Yeah, that is good advice. And that's like universal advice for sure. Grant, where can people find out more about your company and support your work?
OneBrief.com.
Excellent. Go to OneBrief.com, check them out. Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, absolutely, Brendan. Cheers.
Awesome. If you enjoyed the podcast today, you'll love our live events. Check out the MilVet.org for a full list of events. We've got them all across the East Coast, West Coast. We're going to be out in Utah and Colorado for ski season. Check them out. Hope to see you there in person, and we'll catch you guys back here next week.